delighted to host this third Climate Salon, which is a cooperation between our Transatlantic Climate Bridge and the Human Impacts Institute. I emphasize Ernst Peter because I learned that the director of the International Spy Museum is here, and his name is Peter Ernest. So I wonder, it's your guess who's using an alias. So I guess we're all here because we would be worried about the following true story. Two planets meet in space. I beg your pardon, you've heard it before. And one says to the other, boy, you don't look good. He says, no, I don't feel good. He says, what is it? He says, oh, I got it bad. What is it? Oh, the doctor told me I got it real bad. I have humans. The other planet says, don't worry, it'll pass. So that's a pretty sad outlook, and, but I didn't invent this. It really is a true story. I got it from a readout from the NSA tapes. So enough with the frivolousness. So what is a climate salon? We would like to combine tonight action, performance, and serious discussion. We'd like to use inspiration as a tool to think about climate change. And we'd like to get people together who are not just the usual suspects, so people from different areas. The Climate Bridge is a project organized by the German Embassy to foster the communication about climate and energy policy between the USA and Germany. You may have heard that in Germany we have a big political project called the energy transition, which means that we are phasing out fossil produced energy, including nuclear. We'll close our last nuclear plant by 2022. It's an ambitious energy policy, and I'd like to explain we have a legislated preference for renewables. The German law says renewables are to be preferred over fossils. The flip side is there's a legislative bias against the fossils. That's a big difference to the States where you pursue the all of the above energy policy. And in German society, there's a broad consensus in favor of that. Most people in Germany believe that there must be a better way to produce, transport, and consume energy, in particular to make it cleaner and more compatible with preventing dangerous climate change. I gave a talk once in South Carolina to a business group, and I talked all about German investment, German car companies, and the audience was very receptive, and I looked into the crowd just like tonight. Everybody had a big smile. And then I said, I have to tell you something about energy policy. And I mentioned that if in Germany a leading politician was to say, I don't believe in the science of climate change, that would be the end of their career. And so I lost that audience. And I was hoping this little remark will help me gain you as an audience. We're forming a new government right now that will be sworn in probably on the 17th of December after our elections have taken place. And in Germany, usually two parties form a coalition to form a government. And at the beginning of their cooperation, they agree on what they call a coalition agreement. It sets out the guidelines for future policy. And I just wanted to emphasize that the coalition agreement reaffirms our energy transition, says we will stick to our goals of ramping up renewables, phasing out fossils. So don't believe everything you read in the media that the Germans made a big mistake, and that everything's too expensive, and the citizens are rebelling against the price, and therefore the energy transition will be reversed. It's not the case. To get anything done in this world, cooperation between US and Europe/Germany is really key. And that's why we believe it's also essential that we cooperate on energy policy in the widest sense, in particular on energy efficiency, smart grids, the way to a better energy future. that's why I'm glad that you're all here, because I think we all share the same goal, sustainable economy and a healthy environment, so it's great to work together on the path to getting there. With that, I'm not going to stick around for very long, so I seek out our unique, and thank you very much for coming.
Well, thank you so much for that, and please come find a seat. Come on in and don't be shy. My name is Tara Laporte, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Human Impacts Institute, and thank you so much for being here, and thank you to our partners at the Transatlantic Climate Bridge Program and the Goethe-Institut. So we're going to get right into it. Hopefully this event is a little different from most climate or other events you go to. And what we're really looking at, some of our goals for this evening. For one, I would encourage you, if you're a tweeter, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're not a tweeter. The hashtag is Human Impacts DC. You can put questions on there at any point, or comments, or share photos. We encourage you to use social media. So some of our goals for this whole series is to inspire and be inspired. That simply. And to build community, and to try to find resources and share resources of how we can build communities here in DC, but beyond as well. And then the last is to take action. So you will have opportunities to actually do something tonight, to take action on climate change, and to not just be here at the event. And next, so those are some of our goals. We are going to get right into it, and we have our first bit of inspiration, and this is from our very own Leanne Harvey, who is our Community Relations Coordinator at the Human Impacts Institute. And come on up, Leanne. So, in a moment I'm going to introduce all of these people next to me, but first, there's this thing called climate change. We've all heard about it, right? That nasty little thing that's kind of a nuisance, right? And we see that with climate change, we're seeing some really basic things. Tonight's not going to be a night about talking about necessarily the science of climate change. I wanted to introduce, this is just a very simple 30-second video that shows you temperature going back from the late 1800s to 2012. Just see if you can see a trend. Any trends? Anyone notice? Any statisticians in the room? No? Getting warmer, yes. So some think that in order to address climate change, meaningful action happens only when this video happens. I think you'll understand. You know, the proverbial poop hitting the fan, another word. So, what we're here tonight is to explore the idea, does it take poop hitting the fan to take meaningful action? And will climate change ever move into the White House and Congress for good? And to really explore that question, I have an amazing group of people here. I'm just going to pull up their bios quickly so you know who we're talking about. We have first Peter Ernest here, who is founding executive director of the International Spy Museum and a 35-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency. He ran, during his time there, he ran a wide range of intelligence collection and covert actions operations, including counterintelligence and double agent operations working in the FBI and military intelligence. So he's done many things. He's also assigned to the Office of Director of Central Intelligence. He served as an inspector with the Inspector General, liaison with the U.S. Senate, and Director of Media Relations and spokesman. So thank you, Peter. We expect many covert climate operations coming from you. And then we have Suzanne Hunt, who founded Hunt Green LLC in 2007 here in DC. And this provides strategic advising for decision makers in business, government, and non-for-profit arenas, and a range of renewable energy, sustainable mobility, agriculture, and green design. She's also a senior advisor to the Carbon War Room, where she leads their work on aviation and renewable fuels, and has done much other amazing work.
Sounds boring after a spy.
And we have Dr. Georg Mauer here in the red tie, who's first Secretary of Climate and Energy Policy at the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany. And prior to that, he worked at the German Federal Ministry for Environment, Nature Conservation, and Nuclear Safety, with responsibility for climate and energy policy and various international environmental topics at the German Environmental Protection Agency. And sitting next to me, we have Professor Patrice Sims, who is currently an associate professor at Howard University School of Law. And his focus is on environmental law, clean air and climate change, environmental justice, administrative law, and energy law. Whew, a lot of specialties. In 2010 and 11, he served as a political appointment with the Obama administration as a Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Environment and Natural Resources Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. And many other things. We won't go into all the acronyms for those. And then we have, last but not least, Dino Kikaias, we went to elementary school together, so I have to call him, Constantine is another way. And he is a Future Tense Fellow at the New American Foundation, where he's studying the cause and consequences of technological innovation. And he's a frequent contributor to Slate's Future Tense channel, and the author of The Pioneer Detectives. So it's very good, detective and spy sitting next to each other, I like it. And rabble rouser, to your right. And he previously was the Economist Bureau Chief in Mexico City, covering Mexico City, Central America, and the Caribbean, among many other things. So we have amazing people here, and I wanted to start off the panel to ask you this big driving question. Will climate change ever move into the White House and Congress for good? What do you think? Patrice, you had some wonderful thoughts on that. Can you start us off?
Sure, I'll start off answering that question. And I think the straightforward answer to that question is absolutely yes. The climate change will make its way into the White House and Congress. There's no question about it. The question is, how does it happen? Does it happen as the result of thoughtful, proactive decision-making, that we're going to deal with this problem and we're going to deal with it in a way that preemptively addresses some of the most important concerns that we have about it? Or are we going, or is it going to enter the White House? Is it going to knock down the doors of Congress and charge its way in uninvited because we have faced catastrophe that we absolutely now have to react to? And for those of us, and I've spent about 15 years of my life as an environmental lawyer for the government, for environmental nonprofits, and as a scholar, if you look at the history of how we've reacted to things in this country that have been serious environmental issues, we have a tendency to wait to catastrophe, or at least wait till it can't be ignored anymore. You consider some of the apocryphal history of the Clean Water Act, for example. We took the Cuyahoga River catching on fire in the 1960s for us to decide, well, we really need something called the Clean Water Act. We really have to start doing something about that. And so we have a decision to make, right? How are we going to address climate change? How is climate change going to make its way into the White House and into the halls of Congress? And which path it takes, in many ways, is going to be up to us as citizens of this country in terms of what do we demand of our government and what sort of response do we think is the appropriate way.
Peter, I wonder if you have something to add as someone who has worked with communicating between agencies and also with the Senate. Is there a magic trick?
No, I think my take on that is when we move into the White House and Congress, it's already there. In other words, it's not like people, when I say people, it's not like the leadership of the country is unaware of climate change, the issue. That's not the problem. As you know, both recent administrations, Penn, Obama, and so on, and I'm not taking any kind of partisan look here, but there was the Kyoto Treaty, which was not ratified, as I recall, by Congress. There was another effort, I think, under the Obama administration. But regardless of that, it's not as if the White House and Congress is ignorant of climate change. The issue is the disagreement right now that's making our Congress virtually dysfunctional. In other words, you have one side of the aisle that is almost in the state that the speaker referred to, where they're denying the science. In other words, that fundamental disagreement on whether there is climate change. And the problem with the issue of climate change is it's not a today, tomorrow thing. We're talking about something we won't know about for 50 years, 100 years. So I agree with Patrice, we tend to be a just-in-time society. And if climate change is not, around the corner looking at us, it's not there. And that's the way we function. Now, Bezos wants to deliver gifts by drones, and I think that's fine. But we're not going to solve the climate change by any kind of short-term fixes like drones. So it's not a question of not being there. There's just fundamental disagreement among leadership, and I think there's also those who deliberately misinform the public for political reasons about the nature of climate change.
A couple of thoughts, going off of what Peter just mentioned. I think in certain respects our politics can be a just-in-time politics, a reaction to crises. In other ways it isn't. The corporate sector in the US at times makes plans over longer timescales, over years and decades. And I think one of the shifts that we're seeing sort of under our feet as we speak is a shift in the attitude of corporate America, which will be reflected in the political process. The front page of the New York Times today had a story about how many large companies are planning for a carbon tax, including all of the major oil companies. Basically saying everybody except Koch Industries is on board with this. Which is a profound change from how things were 10 years ago. If you look also at the insurance industry, again, a politically important industry, they've been affected by everything from Katrina to Sandy to many causes in between. And big business does make long-term plans. So those changes seem to me to be working towards decoupling the question of climate from the sort of broader cultural war connotations that it has come to acquire. That, oh, you're a Prius-driving liberal. I mean, that stereotype still exists, and exists because it's to an extent based in reality. But I mean, if you look, for instance, at Texas today, which is the national leader in wind power, you find that there are people who are very pro-wind, who are also very politically conservative in other respects. So in that sense, moving climate from a purely political discussion to a more technocratic one is, I think, probably a long-term positive.
Great. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, you know me, I mean, I'll talk as long as you let me, but, I mean, I think it's one of those things where, I read the article too, and companies make long-term, these big corporates are very complex, big animals. So they'll make a long-term, they'll have one part of the company developing a long-term strategy and doing all the right things and saying all the right things, planning for carbon tax, while another part of the company is fighting like hell to make sure that it is as far in the future as possible. So I think the question could also be phrased as rather than saying is climate ever going to be in the White House and Congress, and are the fossil fuel interests ever going to be out of the White House and Congress, because they do have such an incredible influence. And if you look at where the people who are going to be affected most, the people who are going to suffer the most and who are already suffering the most from these impacts, it's the people in the areas who are, often it's the people in rural areas or the people that are being represented by folks that are fighting climate legislation. So there's that aspect as well.
So you guys are already touching on things that are coming. So Georg, can I give you a pause and have you join the next one? Or do you have an urgent part that you wanted to share?
I think I would like to reflect at least, on the question whether the White House has acknowledged climate change. And our perception is it clearly has already. And of course, the question we have is what kind of action will be followed by that. And this is a crucial question, I would say. And what we are observing at the moment is things are happening in the White House. We see the Obama Climate Action Plan. At the same time, we see a lot of things happening outside the White House, which is at the moment maybe even more important. And of course, the next question, and I think we'll come to that later, is will that be enough in order to combat climate change?
Great. So we're going to move on. We'll come back. Don't worry. And next we have. So we're gonna step back a little bit. We started with that big question, and now we're gonna take a few back steps and break it down in terms to really address climate actions. There are three key things that we definitely need, which is knowledge, resources to use that knowledge, and then action. So we're gonna take the first step, look at knowledge. And if we go to the next one. So we have the science first. There's a lot of information on science, and we have a question mark here because I want to show you this next video to show some of the discourse. This is actual discourse that has been, I'm sure you've heard in many other places, but it's coming from the mouths of youth instead of from the mouths of adults, and see what it looks like to you.
Human activity isn't changing the climate. CO2 is harmless.
People can't change the weather.
The ice isn't melting.
It's just a theory.
Climate models are unreliable.
Everybody knows scientists are in it for the money.
Scientists are like altering their data just to get paid.
A scientist will say anything if you pay them.
How could germs be real if you can't see them?
Gravity is just a theory.
Cigarettes aren't addictive. The Earth is flat.
The sun revolves around the Earth.
You can't trust scientists.
Of course it's true. I learned it in school.
Of course it's true. I learned it in school.
So, as a question follow-up to that, so we have a lot of science. That obviously wasn't the science that's out there. But how can we effectively talk about climate change? Because this conversation is still going on in a lot of media and a lot of communities. It's not just a PSA video. How can we effectively talk about climate change? No answer to that.
I mean, I want to seize upon something in that video, which is that there's a germ of truth to it, right? A small germ, but, and that's what makes it potent and powerful as propaganda, which, that sort of line of reasoning is, which is that scientific knowledge is socially constructed. And that you have, over the last century, a growing body of knowledge from philosophers of science, historians of science, who look critically at how scientists come to consensus. And that it's not ever an indisputable thing. That even things that we know of with far more certainty than we know anything about the climate, say the charge of the electron. Physicists all agree what the charge of the electron is. Very few of them because they've seen this firsthand. And that's part of engaging with climate skeptics on that line of saying, no, it's you guys have it all wrong. It is science. Is almost the wrong way to go about it. Is that you'll never have 100% of people who are sort of identified as scientists all saying the exact same thing about how much temperature has risen, because the data is complicated and you have to account for all kinds of systematic effects. So the way, in my mind, to have this discussion is not to try and claim that the science is settled, because it's not and never will be, and it's not how science has ever worked, but to rather say that we have sufficient ignorance that we want to sort of prevent things from being worse in ways that we cannot say with certainty.
Peter, I wonder if you have something to add in terms of working both in a museum, that is an educational institution in some ways, but also having worked with an agency that does use information and sometimes misinformation in order to do things. Can you comment?
One thing I would say is the whole issue of being aware of climate change and so forth. The agency itself, CIA, actually, I think the director in the late 90s recognized the need for us to pay attention to environmental issues. And in other words, they have a bearing on our national security. And there was, I think right around 2000, probably around 1998, the CIA established, this is when the DCI was central, an environmental center of environment and putting out more and more information. A lot of you are familiar with the agency fact book, which is probably one of the most recognized online sources for information on countries all around the world. And they began adding, I think in 1996, lots of facts about environmental issues in every single country. I'll go back to another issue, which is not Gore and the internet, but Gore and the environment. Because Gore, when he was in office as vice president, led the charge to make information in the agency available to the public. That is, we had been running satellites over the Soviet Union, over large parts of the world, for years. In other words, ever since, let's say, the shoot down in 1960 of Gary Powers, we had satellites. And these satellites were continuously circling the globe. So that information, compiled and collated and so forth, was invaluable to scientists in trying to track temperature change, glacier size, and so forth. That's all been made available to the public. So the agency itself continues to track environmental issues as an aspect of national security. I think one of the things that struck me here is we're talking about raising awareness in two of the most advanced societies in the world, the United States and Germany. And the issue is not going to be the United States and Germany, even though we may differ right now on how our both houses of representatives react to the issue. The problem is going to be the countries like China and India, Southeast Asia and so forth that are moving into the middle class. They all want to own cars, they want to run cars, and these will all involve fossil fuels. And so you cannot have a world environmental policy unless everybody's on board. Otherwise you have what they call free riders, in other words, people who are not going to participate, but they'll take advantage of the fact you're participating, which gives them a competitive edge.
I wonder if someone else wants to, you were writing furiously over there. Were they just doodles, or do you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I am not a visual artist, so I was actually writing words. No, you gave me a glass of wine, so I don't trust myself to remember all my bullet points beforehand. I think, I don't have, all of the answers on how to communicate about climate, but I think that we have to have multi-pronged strategies. And so, in the long term, for the long term, we need to beef up science education. So part of the problem about the discussion about the science is that very few people have worked through the scientific process and understand how you develop a theory and how you test it and defend it and all of that. And so it makes it very difficult to put this science in context. I think in the near term, one of the things that we need to do, and Climate Reality is doing a good job trying to do this, but one of the reasons that there isn't this debate in Germany is that they don't have the Koch brothers. And, the debate is manufactured, and there are books out there. The people that were hired to do the manufacturing are the exact same people in think tanks. They can create confusion about the impacts of smoking. So that information is out there. We just need to share it with folks so that they understand that. And then,
can you tell everyone who the Koch brothers are and their role just in a one sentence? Because I think some people might not know.
So they were mentioned earlier in the New York Times article. They're some of the wealthiest men in the world. They own a whole bunch of companies, but made a lot of their money and continue to make their money in the petroleum industry. And they are spending massive sums of money on hiring think tanks to confuse climate science, and then they're spending a lot of money to get, especially Tea Party politicians elected. It was a run-on sentence.
So, Georg, I wonder if you have something to add. Does Germany not have the Koch brothers? And how are you effectively communicating climate change in Germany? Or how do you think it's possible?
Well, when we look at the development, how many people believed in climate change is happening, so that was always there. And of course, we have the discussion going on since, people get aware of the community, the global community, who is not making steps forward. But coming back to science, it's a complex science. You cannot smell it, but scientists are very clear about climate change. It is happening. And some things are evident, like the sea level is rising, the glaciers are melting. That's quite clear. And then, of course, most people don't react scientifically, you could say. So I think that the biggest change in accepting that something like climate change is happening over here happened after the weather, the extreme weather in the last year. And I actually, from a clear scientific perspective, weather is not the same as climate. So at least you need to look at 30 years of weather until you talk about climate. But nevertheless, people start to believe in climate change when they experience extreme weather. So that is reality, that is happening. So the discussion is very complex. In Germany, we simply build on the fact that climate change is happening and don't have an open discussion on that anymore, but you see it still in the papers, and you have discussions going on in a very small part of the scientific scene.
I think you put your finger on one thing when you refer to the fact of whether people believe or not. Because most people have very little understanding of what climate change is. That is, as you say, working their way through the science of climate change, distinguishing climate and weather. And so what they tend to do, people generally, because they have their minds on other things, is simply go along with the sort of elites in their political side of things. And as a consequence, the country becomes more divided because people are not thinking on their own about these issues. They're going along with what the leaders say. And the leaders, if they're taking very different sides, then it becomes a matter of belief. They really don't know what it is. They're simply following the leaders of their particular partisan side. The other thing I would say, and just add briefly, is that when I went in to get tickets for this event this evening on Fandango, I had no idea that I would pick the chair with the worst view of the video screen. But that's all right, because I'm still enjoying it.
Sorry about that. We'll play musical chairs soon, don't worry.
And forevermore, peaceful at the surface and peaceful at the core. All the joy within my heart would be so free to soar. And we're living on a living planet, circling a living star. Don't know where we're going, but I know we're going far. We can change the universe by being who we are. And we're living on a living planet, circling a living star. If all the world knew justice now and forevermore, justice at the surface and justice at the core, all the joy within my heart would be so free to soar. And we're living on a living planet, circling a living star. Don't know where we're going, but I know we're going far. We can change the universe by being who we are. And we're living on a living planet, circling a living star. If all the world knew freedom now and forevermore, freedom at the surface and freedom at the core, all the joy within my heart would be so free to soar. And we're living on a living planet, circling a living star. Don't know where we're going, but I know we're going far. We can change the universe by being who we are. And we're living on a living planet. It's all right, thank you.
Thank you. Do you feel inspired yet? I hope so. Can we turn the projector back on? So we actually are coming, huh? Yeah.
That was very moving, and it certainly brought to mind one of my personal heroes, and that image of it was renewed. My wife and I were recently in South Africa, and the line that you sang, wherever you are, all of you, about I can change the universe, you can change the universe by being who you are. I don't know if you do, but Nelson Mandela passed away today, and he exemplified that as much as anybody.
So we're actually to go to a part where you guys have to participate, and then we'll come back to the panel again in a few moments. We're going to take 15 minutes, and this will be an opportunity for you to, while you're getting drinks and food, you have something you have to do. And you didn't know it, but you all came here to speed date. You're climate speed dating. Don't worry, it's not cheating. It's about climate change. And you have this little activity here. And your goal is, we're going to have 15 minutes. Your goal is to talk to as many different people as you can. I'm going to give you 2 minutes per person, max. I will be timing with a stopwatch and forcibly moving you away from people if I have to. And your goal is to fill out the sheet as much as you can. There are 2 sides. One is one or more resources you know about or that you find out about for actually addressing climate change. And this could be very local. I know a community garden in Fairfax City that gives free composting classes. It could be something like that. Or it could be something very big as well. So any resource that you would say is a resource that someone needs to know about that will help them take climate action in some way. So think big. 5 different ones is your goal, to get 5 of those. On the other side, my challenge for you is during this 15 minutes is for you personally to find 5 climate commitments you are willing to make tonight. So again, these can be very much like, one example is meatless Mondays. I won't eat meat on Mondays if I'm a meat eater. Or I'm going to bike to work twice a week.
You're not already doing?
If you're not, no, you can't cheat and put things you're not already doing. This is trying to push the envelope a little bit. And you see name, email, and affiliation are on there. We're going to check up on you. So be careful what you put down here. All right? So that's going to be your goal. We're going to take 15 minutes. Feel free to get some wine and food while you're at it. But 15 minutes, and your goal is to fill up this sheet. You're going to have 2 minutes to talk, and you have to, only 2 minutes per person. So all of you can stand up. And your first goal, you can't talk to someone you know. So you have to start with someone you haven't met before. And I'm going to start the timer. On your mark, get set, go. All right, everyone. So hopefully that was a exhilarating exchange of some resources and commitments. As my mother said, I'm going to definitely be checking up on her. But one of our goals at the Human Impacts Institute is, I'm afraid you've signed up for a relationship, both in your speed dating, but also with us, is that we want to help keep you accountable to the things you say you want to do and help you find the resources for it. And we will be collecting those papers. So hopefully that stimulated some ideas of that there are quite a lot of resources here. And the next, in this room even, but in the community. And now we're going to get to those, the last bit of this entire event is to look at the actions that are being taken and can be taken. So the first one we're going to look at is, what are actions that people on the ground are taking? And we have a pretty inspiring and unfortunate video about some people that have been were affected in Sandy last year. So watch this.
On my block, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Pray for those who have been devastated by the storm. Pray that you'll never end up in this situation again.
My little dream house, my first house, and it's destroyed. The whole neighborhood is destroyed now.
Nos subimos arriba del látigo porque subió demasiado el agua y ahí nos estuvimos toda la noche.
So much of the houses here were washed off of their foundations and were just crumbled wrecks.
We're still not back in our home.
We have been in a hotel for almost a year.
A lot of places didn't reopen.
I had to make a choice between my job and my children's education because we were dislocated.
Nosotros si no hablamos, las piedras no van a hablar por nosotros.
I'm walking today on behalf of my children and the youths of the Rockaways.
A ver qué arreglamos, que nos escuche, porque la unión hace la fuerza y sí se puede.
La ayuda la ofrecen, pero no la dan. Entonces estamos en esta lucha todavía.
We are not yet whole. We are not yet repaired. That's why we're marching here, so that people can take a view of the truth that people live every day.
Even on my block, I'm gonna let it shine. Even on my block, I'm gonna let it shine. Even on my block, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine.
So I think for some that song could be reminiscent of other movements that have happened in this country. But if we could look at the question we have for this is not corporations. The question is, corporations. Actually, we'll go back. I forgot we added that in. So this actually, before we get to this question, that was an example of really what people are doing, but this is something that you had brought up earlier. Here are some examples from today's New York Times that corporations are saying. These corporations, ones you don't think of necessarily addressing climate change or building that into their business plans. We have BP, we have ExxonMobil. This was the head, we have GE, and others. And if you go Google, this was the headline in the New York Times today. Next slide. Large companies prepared to pay a price on carbon. So when we look at they're supposedly putting this into their business plans and saying this is going to happen. We need to prepare for it. But if we look at the question that I have for you, next slide, who is responsible for action? So we see people taking action. Maybe we see corporations. We certainly see some taking action. We see governments taking action. Who is responsible? Patrice, would you like to start us off on that?
Sorry. I don't have a long-winded answer to this, surprisingly, because we're all responsible. We're all responsible for taking action. We're all responsible for insisting on action from those entities that represent us, be they government agencies or entities, and from those entities that we help to survive through our consumerism. And so we all are responsible for taking action.
Yeah, I fully agree, of course, that everybody is responsible. But of course, it can differ between measures which are possible at the personal level and measures which need more strategic and more political level. And for instance, measures can be very successful if you, for instance, change the standards for housing so that new houses don't need so much energy anymore, or that you simply change what has been done in the US, change the performance standards for power plants. That can make a difference, and that is a political level. But of course, it makes a difference if I use a bicycle, or if I turn on my AC or not, or if I eat a lot of beef or not. So actually, from the German policy level, we would not demand people to change their living style, but of course try to attract, to find solutions which are in the same way providing a good living standard and saving the climate. So that's a challenge, I think.
And Suzanne, sorry, I'm a loud talker. To follow up on that, Can we have a win-win when we're looking at who's responsible for action? Maybe you could answer both of those questions.
You know, one of the challenges is that the microphone is not. Did you do that? I mean, one of the challenges of climate change that folks have alluded to is that it is such a huge global and huge national challenge, and it's hard to pinpoint, you know, all the solutions and the problems because there's so many. And so, to me, this is it's an issue of public welfare, and that's what governments are meant to safeguard. So, you know, that's one of the first places I would look, is to a government. And then the problem with that, though, is if you look over the years, and I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but you know, there's something like 100 corporations that have more resources than 100 countries or something. Somebody has that number. So now you have to look at governments, because that's their job, that's their role. And then companies that have such incredible power now because they are having such they have such resources and reach. So I look at those, and then, you know, a good friend of mine just left the administration, and people asked her why, and she said, "I have done everything I can do. Now I've done everything I can do, and it is up to the American public to put the pressure on government so that they will actually move." So it's all of, I would say it's all, I hate to say it, but it's all of the above.
Do you know, can you pick something that's not all of the above? Or can you target a couple?
I mean, what the first thing that occurs to me is that there are areas in which it's relatively clear-cut what action means and what action should be. And then we can debate this question, you know, how do you achieve those ends? And then there are many areas that climate brings to mind that are really wrenching, where there's no obvious solution that doesn't hurt. You know, you were showing some of the neighborhoods that were affected by Hurricane Sandy. Do you build back the Jersey Shore or not? And you know, I don't know in my own head, you know, what's the outcome that I think is optimal? And I just don't know. You know, at what point does resilience turn into stubbornness, turn into sort of an arrogant stupidity? And you know, and I don't know. And I'm not saying that, you know, the Jersey Shore has crossed that, is on one side of that divide or another. Of, you know, how do you? And this is not just on a personal level. I refuse to leave my house, but on a public policy level of, you know, what level of flood insurance should the federal government be subsidizing that encourages people to live in risky areas? And that's what I think makes so many of the issues around climate so vexing, is that there isn't an obvious solution, even to people of good faith, that they can come to a consensus about.
So I think part of it is global warming, climate control is really not at the top of a lot of countries and groups' lists. That is, if you look at a world in turmoil, was 125,000 people killed in Syria now, nobody's worrying about climate control there, trying to get some control.
Or climate change.
Or climate change. And I think there's two things that come to my mind as I think about what are the possibilities. One is the extraordinary means we have today, as never before, to communicate with 1 billion people. In other words, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or Trump or whatever, there can be instant communication. I mean, people can hear my voice or whoever's voice, and if you had some agreement, something could come out of that. You remember we went through people power.
Just interrupt for 1 second there. In that, I think you're overestimating the power of your voice, having just interrupted you. The fact that notionally you could communicate to 1 billion people at once is a very sort of notional thing. And it's easy to sort of rhetorically trump that as a sort of historically unique moment in the history of humanity. I don't think in reality, you know, the actual information saturation is a real phenomenon that is the flip side of that coin.
You know, I think my point would be not that I personally will be heard by 1 billion people, but a voice can go out and be heard and influence many. And so you're seeing more instances of so-called people power. There was even a fledgling attempt in this country, the Occupy movement, which after a while sputtered and went out. Maybe it'll rise again. But the issue often is, and the example I would use would be the Arab Spring, where you had a surge of power because many, many people were opposed to something. In this case, it was the Mubarak administration.
You also had that in 1917 and 1848. This is not a new phenomenon in history.
It's unique in the sense that a lot of the communications were done by Twitter and the social media. You didn't have that in 1917. The communists did not have access to Twitter and social media.
They had telegrams.
They had mimeograph machines. Okay. I don't even think they had those, as a matter of fact.
They did.
Anyway, you had an instance of where there was an uprising and a fundamental part of it was communications. In that case, it was social media. And what happened was they achieved their aim, and then it was taken over by other groups, and also, when they achieved their aim, their expectations were not met the next day. And climate change is the sort of thing you're not going to meet anybody's expectations the next day.
And I think this is something we're going to come to in a little bit, is if we're to use some of these technologies, or even go back to not needing technology to start a movement. It's not necessary to have Twitter to start a movement. We've had many throughout history, to touch on both of your points. But what are our asks? And we're going to come to that in a little bit. If we're going to use this technology, what do we want people to do? And giving those specifics. But before that, keeps coming back. It's all right, I got it again. I want to move to the next slide. And to look a little bit at policy, this is something that we touched on a little bit earlier, but to come back full circle to the beginning of if it's moving into the White House and Congress, let's take a look at this to see about policy.
The Earth's climate does not care whether you are a Democrat or a Republican. It doesn't care whether you're liberal or conservative. Climate change will affect all Americans, no matter what your political beliefs, your religious beliefs, your race, class, creed, etc. Okay? And in the end, the only way we're going to deal with this issue is if we come together as a country and have a serious conversation, not about is it real, but what can we do about it.
So my question with that is exactly that. If we're to come back to the policy piece of it, and to think of what you were just talking about, of what's possible and maybe what's not, what do we actually want from our government?
I definitely would like a plan from the government, a plan which looks at a foreseeable future and acts according to that plan. So I don't want all the time to come back to Germany, but at least there we have one example which worked quite well. So we looked at the year 2050, and the idea was to create a sustainable energy supply until 2050, and with that, it was possible to create a plan around that. I don't want to say that's perfect, but at least that's a good idea to do so. And I think government should have a plan how to achieve these kind of targets.
Yeah, it's a really difficult question because, and I think one of the things that's so difficult about the policy question here in the United States is it's really going to challenge our governance architecture to deal with the problem of climate change, because it's not an issue of easy fix. It's an issue that touches on every segment of our economy and goes to the roots of our system, our economic system in the United States. And we're not well designed to come up with a national policy that coherently addresses the real challenges of climate change towards a concrete and achievable solution. So it's going to challenge us in a way that I think we are rarely challenged as a society because of its magnitude. Now, what that means, I think, is that it calls that much more the need for a plan and the need for the conversation about what that plan is going to look like, what it's going to accomplish, and who it's going to include. Clearly, industry and corporations have a huge role to play. In moving in the direction that we need to move. And part of getting there is going to be figuring out how to unstick the conversation among the players in our economy who are going to need to be a part of that action. And a coherent plan is the first one we're getting there.
I disagree. It's a piece of cake. No, I mean, I think just because of how challenging it is to do something completely comprehensive, I think what we can do is what another good friend of mine says is acupuncture. You know, there are a number of really good analyses of where the biggest levers are to pull, and we don't have to do every. That's like the 80-20 rule. If you can get to 80% or even the 50% just to get the ball rolling. You can have a huge impact without having to swallow the whole thing all at once. In the U.S., I saw Heidi May, she knows this number, 40 to 50% of the electricity in the U.S. is used by buildings, and most of our buildings are highly inefficient. So is it 40? 40%. So there's a huge lever right there. Just having reasonable. Germany has fantastic building efficiency programs and standards that we can learn from. Electricity generation is one of the biggest things. You could say having a national renewable energy strategy is just a big government thing, but you could also see it as a competitive issue. Germany has a national renewable energy strategy. China has a national renewable energy strategy. And we should have one too, because that's the future. And all of our top entrepreneurs and innovators, and even the finance guys, are looking at clean tech as the future. It's not easy, and no investment is, but I think we can, look at some of these key strategic spots to write policy about. We don't have to make it comprehensive. Ideally, carbon tax would be great, but I think we can start with some strategic things.
We're looking at something that really is long term, and we're dealing with a world in which the clock ticks away today. And this country, just to take this country, is capable of enormous achievement when it's focused. In other words, after Pearl Harbor, the country mobilized in a way it never had before, to the extent that it had. We'll go to the moon, Kennedy's commitment. And the country has not yet reached what Gladwell would call a tipping point, where people care about this, where they want to know what they can do with their houses and so forth. And that day may come, and it may come simply because of groups like this and others which are raising the awareness. But I think Gladwell was right. I think in a society, if you're looking at the kind of change that we need to make, and perhaps sounds like Germany has embarked on already, we need to reach a tipping point. And I don't think we're anywhere near that. And if you read the papers today, I don't mean today, but in the last few days and so forth, part of why Obamacare has had such a difficult time, and I'm not coming out one way or the other, is people have lost faith in government. In other words, whether their government is capable of doing something like this. And when people lose faith in their government, they're still obeying the laws, they're still paying their taxes and so forth, but they're not at the point where the tipping point is, where they're going to get the message and commit to something in a really wholesale way.
And that's really great. That comes back to really how we started the conversation is, does it take something like, catastrophic to really, things just going crazy for us to take action? And I'm going to pause us there because we have our last segment in a moment, and it's how do we really inspire people to take action. But before that, we have our last inspiring singer. And I would ask if the speakers could again come over here. And I'm very excited to present Nimat Young. She is a singer-songwriter based here in the Washington, D.C. area. And if we could turn off the projector again, is Greg in the room? No? Are you? Perfect. And welcome, Nimat.
This song is called Somewhere Amazing.
Thank you so much, Nimat. It was beautiful. But before I ask you back here, this is again coming full circle. So we want to both, we've heard think global, act local. And this is an example of some of the things that our panelists have mentioned in terms of what it's been like on the international scene to address climate. But it takes a little bit of a fun approach to it. And I think you could also see it as a a bit of a metaphor for some local action as well. Is, you know, why should I do it if you don't?
Take a look.
Ask the speakers to come right up here for the last two questions of the night. And not only because I think that's one of the coolest policy videos I've ever seen. I think if we did that instead of white papers, so much would happen. So my question to you is, how do we inspire others and ourselves to take action, particularly when not everyone is doing it?
The video is a really good way to kick this part of the conversation off because it uses music and it uses humor. And so those are two of the things that move us more than anything and kind of make us receptive. So I would say, one of the dynamics that's unfolded is that because the problems are so dire and they're so big, we want other people to understand them. And so we've spent decades trying to explain and trying to get people to understand them. And the result has been that we are the doom and gloom people, and people shut down. When things are so overwhelming, human beings, it's human nature to shut down. I can't deal with this. So I think, combining these, actually playing and working with the best sides of humanity, people helping people, and it's fun, and it makes you feel good, and your life is enriched kind of stuff. And I don't want to ignore the techie parts. We can get to the techie parts, because I think that's really important too. I actually do work on a lot of techie stuff too, so it's more fun to talk about this stuff. But I think, we need to bring the joy back into it. Instead of focusing on the problems, focus on the solutions. And it turns out there's actually quite a bit of social science literature showing that peer group affiliation is one of the strongest influences in people's life. People, for a long time, psychologists thought it was fear and love, and peer group affiliation is really powerful. We evolved as clan animals. And so community-based approaches, where you have a community of people to support you. So just, like your, I'm gonna hold you to your commitments thing, it makes it fun and you feel supported and you get to support others, and so that's how it started.
You guys are lucky. I did one art project where I made climate guilties, I called them, where you had to write your commitments on a t-shirt, so you felt guilty every time you wore it if you weren't doing it. So you guys are getting off. Dina, did you have something to add?
No, I mean, and conversely, I think this idea of appealing to sentiment is important. I'm a reporter, and this is important what I do. Right? But what I was trying to say earlier is choosing examples that are apt to the broader question you're trying to illustrate. And telling nobody in the room probably what they don't know already, the Arctic, in this case, is a powerful metonym for the globe as a whole. That's the place where these things are visible today. And there has been already a lot of powerful reporting, and I think Elizabeth Colbert's series in The New Yorker a couple of years ago, plenty of other work that you can vividly show that this is happening now. I mean, it's happening now all around the world. It's not just happening at glaciers in the northern latitudes. But that's where you can show the effects that you're trying to illustrate.
There are a couple of points here. One is this really good, how do we inspire each other, inspire others by communicating the issue. And the other is, how do we inspire ourselves and inspire others through action? And there are a couple of things that I think go a long way to accomplish that. One is demystifying the problem and demystifying the solutions. Because it seems so huge and intractable that when you focus in on specific issues, and I like your example of the farm in New York, right? How do you focus in on exactly what is it that you can do, what is it that we can do, and how can we show that it works? Demystify it as a problem and then provide an example of a targeted type of solution and inspire people. And walk the walk. And show people that in fact, our lives and our society and our culture is enriched by doing these things that we do for ourselves and for one another, and that it's not all of this abstract discussion. There are things that we can do.
I think what works are good examples. What comes to my mind is, for instance, energy cooperative, which over the years took more and more of their own energy production, and then inspired people to participate. And it turned out that they can produce their own energy for half the costs. That is, of course, inspiring. So a lot of cooperatives, again, a movement which could be observed in Germany. Now we have almost 1,000 energy cooperatives. It started with a few just 10 years ago. This can be inspiring. It's more difficult if you look at the country level. So I think for Copenhagen, the EU tried to be very clever and wanted to be forerunners and be inspiring for the rest of the world. It didn't work out at all. And at the same time, you see a country like China, which would not commit itself to anything on the UN level, but at the same time develops a very ambitious climate targets and renewable goals. So this can be inspiring for other countries, and they suddenly see, well, there must be something to it. And I think win-win situations are clearly inspiring. So you're making business with it, you have more jobs, and you're solving your climate problems at the same time. So that is, I think, the story we would like to tell.
Well, I would simply add that it's interesting to hear both the speakers refer to inspiration. And I think if we look back and many of us saw the film Lincoln, to what extent was his, and he was reviled by many people, but he became in the end one of our most inspiring leaders. You look at Martin Luther King, you look at, in so many cases, great things have been accomplished because others, like Nelson Mandela, have simply done what they did. And his wasn't so much as doing something, it was not doing something, not inspiring his people to rise up against those who had oppressed them. But it was simply his life, his inspiration. And I think that in your way, by creating these salons, going across the country, it is an inspiration. In other words, for others who may ask why you're doing this, and maybe through the process this evening of writing down, making commitments and so forth, that in many small ways often is the paper trail or the breadcrumbs that lead to great inspirations and great movements.
Thank you, and I'm excited to say on a couple of those points, we actually have two actions that at least two actions that you can take tonight before you leave, and one is about renewable energy and the World Wildlife Fund. Where is Kevin? Kevin over here will be having you be able to sign up. They're actually starting a bulk solar purchasing program, similar here in the DC area, so Northern Virginia, Maryland, and DC. So that's one action you'll be able to take, as well as this idea of continuing the breadcrumbs and spreading what's happening tonight. We have Elena from the Climate Reality Project, and there are tons. How many people are from Climate Reality Project? I think we have 3 or 4 here. These people are people that have volunteered to be trained to give presentations on climate issues and to help you and to give you presentations for free. Whether it's at your book club or whether it's at your school or business. So you're going to be able to sign up with Elena to request one of these, and I really ask that all of you do that. It's such an easy thing, and it's about spreading that knowledge, keeping a conversation going. It's easy, it's fun, have wine, have yoga, I don't know. So we're coming, before that, we have one more question and one more video to show you. And if you guys, are you okay seeing the last one here? If you want to, and then we'll have room for a few questions. So this is actually a video that came out. It's from a corporation, you'll see, and it has just come out, and it has gone viral on the internet. And maybe you'll see some of the reasons why.
We are scared. We are scared seeing the present. We are scared for the future.
You realize that you're someone else's protector.
Maybe there's something you should know about the world in which your child will live. Something real. Something that's already happening. Every day, more and more food is being grown with a revolutionary method: care. And new technologies will make clean drinking water available to hundreds of millions. So this will probably be the famous water war they speak so much about. And illnesses that today affect millions of children a year will be prevented by simple, everyday products. Your child could have more possibilities of having a healthier heart than any living person today. And the same chance of a broken heart. No one can escape that. And by the time they find the right person, our children will have better chances of meeting their great-grandchildren than we ever did. Breathe calmly. Bring your child into this world. There has never been a better time to create a brighter future for everyone on the planet. For those yet to come.
Where I come from, you don't get to see clean water like that.
The world needs more good guys, and I like to think our baby will be one of the good guys.
But we have to change for them first.
We might not see it,
We
but
won't
maybe
see it,
our
but
great-grandchildren
great-grandchildren will see it.
Great-great-grandchildren.
We're the characters in this story. How the story pans out is based on how we behave in this story. So, yeah, it's up to us to make a change, absolutely.
Any tears? It gets me every time. I'm such a sap. I think I've watched it 20 times now. But anyways, I think there's a lot we could talk about with this, but I want to pull out the point of how are we leading by example? Can we end here with what are some things that are happening right now that are inspiring? Suzanne?
I'll start with what Suzanne said earlier. I'll take her words, but, which is saying that large companies are complicated things, and that the New York Times article, which we've been discussing, is on the one hand a real phenomenon, and on the other hand good publicity for companies that are doing other things that are not so good. And I think that's also true of this video.
Definitely, there's been a lot of discussion about it.
And I had not seen it until just now, but I appreciate that you found it moving, but to me, like, my primary reaction is like, I find it very strange that Unilever's like telling me to go procreate so that my husband. It was weird. That's not what you asked remotely. But
no, it's good. I mean, I think that's a great part of it because and that's why I debated on showing this or not, because it's also they highlighted a lot of their products in it.
Well, there are more firms which are known for critical things like Walmart, that they're having a very interesting policy on renewables and on energy efficiency. So that can be very inspiring, of course. I think I forgot the second example that I can talk about.
Maybe it'll come back to you. I think, I've lived in DC for 10 years now, and when I first moved here, it was really hard to find a place to lock my bike up. And now I can't walk out the door without stumbling over a bike rack, a bike share. There's car shares, there's bike lanes. There are now apparel companies, that provide bike gear for commuters with lights that are built into your helmet. There are things like that where. There's companies like Ethical Electric. DC just passed the Community Solar Act. There are so many good things happening, and there's a book that was written recently about how the social and environmental movements are the biggest movement in human history, and we don't actually know what they're talking about it. So that's actually another nice thing to come out of this, is that we actually do, public opinion polls. It's tricky because you have all the noise from the media and all that stuff, but when you actually look at all of the great innovative, especially business models, but innovative community, all kinds of stuff that's happening, it's actually really good if you kind of look at it collectively and inspiring.
I think that's a really good point. All of the pieces, lots of the pieces of the puzzle are starting to be created individually in little pockets and corners. And we see it. I've been in DC for 15 years, and it's a completely different city, and things about it have changed in ways that have facilitated a friendlier, a planet-friendlier lifestyle. And that's happening in different ways across the United States. One of the things that I've observed about policy over the 15 years I've been here in DC and dealing with policy is people make the decision, policy make the decision to require change when it appears that that'll be a pretty easy thing to do. That's when it happens. And as all these pieces get created, and they are getting created, that picture will become clearer and clearer. We'll get to the point where the tipping point won't be so difficult because all of the pieces of the puzzle will be out there, and it'll be easier for the policymakers to say, you know what, it's time to put the puzzle together. And so what's happening, I think, is the pieces are being created.
So I want to open it up for a few minutes of questions, and then we'll let everyone mingle and keep asking questions until around 9:30. Any questions from the audience?
I have so much in my head, I don't know how to get this out, but it comes from the propaganda comment, and I'm a former elected official who had to deal with the press, and I used to work for the Wall Street Journal, so I've been on both sides of it, and I was really concerned about what you said, and one thing that Al Gore has taught us, climate reality presenters, is to take on denial, and I know you're not a denial kind of gentleman, so. But what you said about extreme weather, I just completely disagree with. And there's so much energy in our Earth system now, in the atmosphere, that the scientists are saying it's influencing all the weather, and that you can no longer say, I know there's the debate, but you can't say that storm was caused by climate change, but they're saying the entire system has so much more energy in it that you can't say that it's not being. So I just wanted to throw that back to you and say, how can you say that's propaganda? It's,
maybe can we let you know?
Well, I'm just going to add on to what she
Sure,
said.
go ahead.
It's not that climate change is causing these storms, it's that it's changing them and influencing how they develop. So they're developing into much stronger storms. And that's what the scientists are feeling confident about saying now, where they didn't say that before.
Right, so two things. One, the question is what standard of evidence you're trying to meet, right? And you can look at even something notionally far simpler in terms of local pollution, and cases where the sort of common sense response of, some sort of pernicious chemical leaching into the groundwater and a rise in cancer rates, and there being lawsuits. And it's very difficult to establish causal relationships. It's even harder when you're talking about something global. I don't fundamentally disagree with anything either of you said, but at the same time, all I'm urging is a bit of caution in terms of not trying to adapt the tactics that you see being successful in order to defeat somebody you disagree with. Those tactics are fundamentally flawed in terms of trying to pick a particular victim and say, this is a victim of climate change. I believe that such people exist, but you need to choose those examples very, very carefully, I think. Both out of sort of ethical considerations on the face of it, and out of a sort of tactical consideration that if you don't, you leave yourself liable to be left sort of hanging, basically.
So I think it's good to have the warnings, to make sure that we're not opening ourselves up to be discredited. And we just I saw this last couple of weeks ago when I was in LA. There were a bunch of celebrities that were helping out with a PSA on fracking, and they were saying things that were just, indefensible. And you're like, whoa, hang on. You need. So that's it's a valuable caution. I think the thing that kind of stunned me in that exchange earlier was that I wasn't actually thinking about speaking to people's hearts as a tactic. I was actually thinking about it as a mental shift in all of ourselves, that we're human and we're all human and we're all in this together, and instead of this intellectual debate, we actually have to talk to each other as human beings. And it is, you're right, it is a tactic. And it hadn't actually occurred to me to pick, this poor child is suffering in pieces. It was much more like, let's actually have a conversation as human beings as opposed to this purely academic conversation, and we're not actually talking about our personal experiences and how it affects us as people.
Can we get another question? And we'll have one more after this, and then we'll...
Yeah, I guess it addresses both of kind of what you're saying. I agree, we can't, with any one particular disaster, say that this is climate change. It's the totality of it. So that's the problem of looking at one person and saying, your problem is caused by climate change. No, it isn't. But the totality of it, the probability is so infinitely great that all of these disasters, the vast majority of them have been made much worse by the climate change. I'll actually argue that I did the climate reality training last year, and that was one of the things that bothered me a lot, were all these pictures of disasters where you take the most benign year and you have a good photographer, you can get good pictures of disasters. It's the statistics, it's the data that are the compelling thing to show that there are so many more of these disasters and so much worse. And I think that's the thing to bring out on a gut level.
Yeah, which is, I suppose, coming from another way, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. If you're going to appeal on the basis of statistics, then that's not so much an appeal to somebody's heart, right? And that's ultimately what makes this debate a heavy lift, convincing people who might not already agree with you, is that an emotional appeal, while useful, will only take you so far. Ultimately, the use of technology is what has caused this set of problems, right? It's also what allows us to be aware that it exists, right? Launching a rocket releases a bunch of really bad stuff into the atmosphere, both locally and globally. But without rockets, we don't have satellites that give us the information that lets us get global temperature and humidity readings and make some assessment of of where we are. So, I mean, we all want to have a sort of as visceral understanding as we can to say there's a physical object, there's a chair, there's a person, there's something. The data that's most persuasive about climate change is ultimately abstract. And convincing people of that data's reality is ultimately an intellectual task that has to appeal to their minds, which have to have been trained and educated sufficiently to be able to apprehend that appeal. And you can't make that appeal to their hearts. It just doesn't parse.
I actually wanted to comment just briefly about appealing to the heart, but I come from my interest in climate change comes from I used to work in psychology, and it appears to me that a big part of the problem that maybe we don't have time to talk about, or it's not the focus of the discussion, is the fact that as a society we're addicted to an unsustainable lifestyle, and we tend to look at how we can do away with the symptoms when we don't get to the personal problem. And changing that personal problem, it seems, is a lot of what you were talking about, getting to the heart of a person, situating yourself as part of the problem, and speaking from a very personal place, as opposed to always talking about how we can change external systems, which is important, but it's only one half of the coin. So I don't know if there's a question in there, but I think if we're talking about how to inspire people, perhaps we're talking about things that are spiritual and relational and community building, and how can we make that part of our work?
Great. On that note, do we have any final comments at all for our panel?
I mean, I think that was really well. You said what I was trying to say a lot better than I was saying it. But I think it's not one or the other. But I think we've gotten to the point where it's really hard to talk with the polarization. It's been really hard to have a conversation with the important data that we need to make a point. But if you can actually have a human connection, to simplify it to a ridiculous degree, you're bonding over a football game, whatever. If you just connect as human beings, and then you can actually have a conversation where you share real data and information. But yeah, I think it's all about taking personal responsibility, and that's really hard. And that's where you get to the deep psychology.
That's a very good point, and I think that there is a way to communicate with people about climate change, about the importance of climate change, and the importance of their engagement, their personal engagement in the issue, without having them understand all of the science. I mean, essentially, if you insist that you must understand all the science in order to appreciate climate change, you necessarily must conclude that 75% of our population can never engage in that conversation and can't be important elements in decision making and policy making and communication, because they're not going to. They're not going to take the time. They're not, and so I don't think it's correct to say that you can't communicate these issues in a way that's meaningful to people and that will move people to want to react and engage. You do have to use great care. You do have to not engage in tactics that are going to have ethical or credibility problems. But you can communicate with people about all number of things. I mean, people make decisions about their health when they go to the doctor. They don't understand what specifically is happening in that medical procedure. They might make bad decisions, but that doesn't mean they can't make well-informed decisions. They can. They can make well-informed decisions. And part of what we need to do as a community is figure out how to translate what the important elements of climate change is into a language that both people will understand, that is accurate, and that will move people to want to engage and want to care about the issue, as they definitely should, because it's going to affect them.
I think that's a wonderful note for us to end on, and I want to thank all of you up here and all of you in the room for being a part of this. And please do pass your sheets to Nadia. Nadia, if you could raise your hand right here. We are going to follow up. We are going to pull together these resources and other resources we found and share them with you. And keep this conversation going. Please come find Elena right here and sign up to have a climate reality presentation wherever you want it. And also please come and find Kevin to learn more about this bulk purchasing for solar. It's an amazing step, as you can hear, in terms of having renewable energy in your home. And the last thing is, please return your name tags. Thank you so much for being here, and we hope you leave a little bit more inspired to take climate action.